Daredevil Noir is a 4-issue miniseries published between June and September of 2009. It is an alternative version of the Daredevil superhero from Marvel Comics, from the alternate Earth 90214. The story is set sometime during the 1930s, and it was written by Alexander Irving and illustrated by Tom Coker. This version of Matt Murdock could never afford to go to law school, and given his time period, there were little resources for his handicap regardless. So instead he finds himself working as a legman for his private detective friend Foggy Nelson. Following his father's murder, Matt made a living for himself performing stunts for the neighborhood kids and performing in a vaudeville act, where he was also forced to clean up after the shows and sleep in the storage area behind the stage with the rats, fueling a lifelong anger that would boil over into his adulthood, manifesting as the Daredevil persona. While Daredevil has obviously always had a violent streak, this particular version of the character is on the warpath from word go. Even the framing device that's used to tell this story frames him as a violent force of nature, a borderline unstoppable brawler, his first spoken line in the story being, "I've come to finish it." His face silhouetted so you can't read his expression, the blood red of his costume striking out against the shadows, and a trail of human carnage left behind him, with more than a dozen armed, hardened thugs left unconscious. The foot soldiers of an all-too-familiar face. The longtime enemy of Daredevil as a character, Wilson Fisk, also known as the Kingpin, the mastermind behind the drama I'm about to describe to you. Like most of these stories, it starts with a woman. The kind that will barge straight into a man's office when he's not around. The kind that doesn't show an ounce of fear when a loaded handgun is pointed in her direction. Matt would know he can smell fear, and something about her almost immediately calls out to him. And in my opinion, this instant attraction is one of the weaker parts of the story. Matt develops an almost stalkerish obsession with this woman named Eliza, and the two really don't interact that much over the course of the story. It all seems to stem from the fact that he can't get a read on her the way he can everyone else. But due to this relationship not being properly fleshed out over the course of the story, this part all feels a bit rushed. Again, less like a fatal attraction from afar and more like a creepy obsessed stalker. And considering the role Eliza ends up playing over the course of the story, this rides the borderline of the puppet master of this whole affair being omniscient, knowing that Eliza would be able to instantly seduce Matt, so he would be forced to play the role he was destined to play in the war between Fisk and another gangster named Halloran, Eliza's current boyfriend, a man she claims she wants to run away from and start a new life away from crime. However, not only is Halloran a powerful and dangerous man, with senators and police officers on his payroll, but he's also recently acquired the services of the Bullseye Killer, a hitman who has allegedly never missed a shot, and obviously the noir counterpart to Daredevil's longtime rival. Eliza has dirt on Halloran, where his secret places are, how his men are distributed, and although she never directly says what she wants Matt and Foggy to do for her, it's pretty clear she's asking the two to act as middlemen for Fisk, giving out whatever information she can give to them to his greatest enemy, a man he is currently planning on going to war with for Hell's Kitchen. A war the two discuss over a nice dinner, with Halloran giving Fisk one last chance to leave the city, viewing himself as the more powerful of the two. However, Wilson Fisk is not the type to back down in any universe. So while the two men shake hands, they both silently prepare for war, knowing that things are going to get ugly ahead. Meanwhile, Matt has begun waging his own one-man war against Halloran and his goons, attacking his, at the time, illegal alcohol shipments, and from his own perspective avenging all of the people Halloran's killed in his rise to the top. If there's one thing Matt can't stand the smell of, it's a self-satisfied criminal. And Orville Halloran reeks of self-satisfaction. Yet he's also constantly reminded of how wide Halloran's reach is, especially when he comes across the victims of the Bullseye Killer. These particular victims having worked for Wilson Fisk and his own illegal alcohol racket. This is the last chance for anyone who doesn't want the story spoiled to hop out of the video and come back after you read it. You should be able to find a physical or digital copy for a reasonable price. Alright boys, you've been warned, let's progress. Although I would like to take one last detour before we hit the home stretch. I would like to take a moment to examine the writing of this story to show you how good it is instead of trying to explain it. And I quote, "What did it feel like? Like every time someone kicked my cane away from me before I learned I didn't need it. Like every time the applause stopped and I knew I'd sleep alone backstage with the rats. Like every time someone laughed at me because my father was too dumb to play along. It feels like every ounce of the character's anger is boiling to the surface, dying to be cut loose, to be wielded like a cudgel against Wilson Fisk, the man who played Matt Murdock like a damn fiddle, used him as a tool in his war against Halloran to take over Hell's Kitchen. Murdock's home and a home he believes is worth fighting for. At the very least, he's too damn stubborn to stop." After an impromptu meeting with Wilson Fisk, a little bit before the events of the framing device, it is revealed to Matt that not only does he know who Daredevil is, but he also knows for a fact that Halloran killed Jack Murdock, weaponizing the anger inside the devil of Hell's Kitchen, and directing it at his one rival for control of the city, pushing the vigilante into one last attempt to reach the top of Halloran's pyramid, breaking into Halloran's secret bars and beating down his men by the dozen, leaving some of them crippled for life as a message to their boss of what's coming for them, until eventually Matt and Halloran come face to face for the first time, and all the secrets are finally revealed. Fisk told Halloran who Daredevil was. Halloran let Daredevil hit his rum shipments, as they were intentionally his weaker targets, essentially throwing a bone to local law enforcement. And Eliza shows up, proving that she is far from the damsel in distress she portrayed herself as, and Halloran introduces her as the Bullseye Killer. And she reveals to Halloran before taking his life that she's under the employment of Wilson Fisk now. And all of this, everything in the story was just a setup for Wilson Fisk to gain control of Hell's Kitchen, to pin both of his enemies against each other, and hopefully get both of them killed by the Bullseye Killer in one night. Again, the planning to pull this off borderlines on the supernatural, but it does ultimately lead to a pretty cool fight. And I have to say, calling her Eliza, drawing in that parallel of Daredevil's on-again, off-again ninja girlfriend Elektra, and then pulling out the twist and making her Bullseye was pretty good writing. Although aside from Foggy, she was the only other named character that wasn't doing something at the time, so maybe I was just being a little slow on the uptake there. It happens sometimes. Happens to the best of us. It even happens to Kevin, and he's the worst. The fight ends after Daredevil takes Eliza for a swim in the harbor, proving that his punches are more effective under the water than her throwing forks are. And then it all comes back to this. Wilson Fisk Daredevil having a little bit of narrative foreplay before they throw hands. Wilson Fisk almost basking in his expert-level scheming, damn near soliloquizing on how he and Daredevil are going to be engaged in endless fighting from now on, because every hero needs a villain. And I'm gonna be honest, this speech is a little corny. I'm going to end this video on a better monologue, I promise. But ultimately, the story closes out on this shot of Wilson Fisk and Daredevil going into fight, the way God intended. Ultimately, I would say Daredevil Noir is worth a read. I don't think it's anything particularly groundbreaking, but I think it's a good way to get your feet wet if you're new to noir or pulp-style storytelling. Although at this point, I feel like enough writers have tried emulating Frank Miller's run that Daredevil and noir-style storytelling kind of go hand-in-hand at this point. It's like Daredevil and Batman are probably the easiest two superheroes to point to with that. And I guess if you want to go really deep, the question. I do think the artwork can make the action scenes a little hard to follow sometimes, but I think the writing is strong enough over the course of the story to really make up for that. And here's another example of what I think a good monologue from this story is. I hear every mouse in the wall, every heartbeat of my neighbors. I know a woman is pregnant before she does. I smell cancers on the bodies of old men. Thin ice over deep, deep water. If I could get to the bottom, there I could rest. I dream of a quiet place. Home is a prison I carry in my head. It really hammers home the complex relationship between his deep-rooted problems, his insecurity with his disability, and just the melancholy that comes with being able to hear and perceive almost everything around you, beyond the limitations of over-relying on sight. And part of me can't help but wonder what would have happened if they had given Frank Miller the reins for this universe. If we could have seen a Daredevil Noir from a neo-noir master's perspective. But unfortunately, that's a reality we'll never live to see, my friends. With all that said, I'd like to thank you guys for watching. Daredevil Noir is a story I've read 2 or 3 times now. I think the first time I read it, I actually did it all in one sitting. And while I can't say it's my favorite of the Noir Universe stories, that's definitely Wolverine Noir. It's probably my second favorite of all of them. The X-Men Noir stories can get a little hokey. I felt like the Spider-Man Noir stories kind of missed the point because he still has all of his powers. He might not be as physically strong as the mainline Spider-Man. And then the Iron Man and Luke Cage Noir stories are just pretty bad. And the Punisher one's alright, but it's just a little generic. Anyway, I'd like to thank you guys again for watching this video. Likes and comments are always appreciated. They help boost the video in the algorithm. You're always welcome to leave recommendations in the comments below, but Patreon requests take priority. After this, I'm probably not going to upload for a little bit. My patron Rob made a request for a book series a while back, and it's going to take me a while to read the first 3 books, since they're kind of their own standalone trilogy from the rest of the series. And then I'll work on a few smaller projects where I can fit them in. Alright, I'm out for real this time. You guys have a good one. See you later.